Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new webinar in our series of knowledge nuggets from MGS Design and Development. I'm here today with Martin. I'll bring him up on your screen so you can see him too. And Martin, today he will take us through our design for reliability framework and dive into a few examples of the tools we have and how we use them and why it works. So just a short introduction to who Martin is then. Martin has been with MGS D&D for, I think, almost 10 years, Martin, starting as a development engineer, working with medical device development, and is now a senior engineer and really one of our go-to guys when it comes to designing robust medical devices and combination products from A to Z, but really focusing on making robust mechanical engineering solutions.
Thank you, Kasper. And I'll continue from here. I'll jump right into it by presenting a question. So how do you know if your device is actually mature enough for clinical trials? That's the question we'll try to answer in this session. And it will be from a mechanical engineering perspective, though you will hear some design control language, but I'll mainly focus on the mechanical engineering level that feeds into design control. So I believe that most device projects, they don't fail because they're missing a tool or method. They fail because the decision were made without enough engineering clarity, too early, with too little understanding of what actually drives the performance and risk. As Kasper said, I'll demonstrate how we use a framework called Design for Reliability to structure those decisions. And it's in the space between design input, where requirements are defined, and design outputs, where the design is documented, specified, and verified. Now you will see some examples from our own in-house developed auto-injector platform called AIR. And it's mainly because most of the client work we are working on, that's confidential. And it's also a project that's about to enter the maturing phase. So it's a perfect example of how we will drive the decision in that project while we are working on it. The AIR auto-injector platform is a auto-injector that only consists of 7 injection molded parts, 2 metal springs, and a PFS. It works by the user removing a cap and then press a shield against his own skin to activate the device and start the injection. During the injection, the user will hear an audible feedback and also see a visual feedback. The unique part about this auto-injector compared to other auto-injectors is that it uses a tension spring rather than a compression spring, and it's loaded between 2 parts and that's interlocked. But let's go directly to the framework. So as I said, it's a framework that sits in between the design input and then design output, and it consists of 7 engineering disciplines, and I'll just list them up. It's interface and kinematics, materials, tolerances, simulation and modeling, test and verification, design for manufacturing, and design for assembly. When you're entering the maturing phase of a mechanical device project, you're not supposed to use all these engineering disciplines at once for all parts, but you should use the disciplines that suit the project the most and can answer the most critical questions. So, for instance, with the AIR auto-injector platform, you would most likely use some of the disciplines to investigate how the power spring and its interfacing components, how they work and how you can reduce the risk related to that. You don't have to focus as much on the housing, for instance, that doesn't carry the same amount of load. Yeah, and also try to go through some of the discipline. I'll not go through all of them, but of course you are welcome to ask questions about all of them in the Q&A. But if I mention something about, for instance, tolerances, it's to make an investigation about whether the design work, and not just work, but also within the expected variances of tolerances. When you do tolerance assessment, it's not just about treating all tolerance assessment equal, but it's about knowing where the risks are. Some tolerance assessments will see a gradual degradation of the device function, while for others you will see an abrupt failure. So you should never treat them equally. Simulation and modeling. We already had a webinar about this topic, so I'll only say a few words. The strengths about simulation in regards to design for reliability is that it bridges the gap between maybe a too simplified model when you do tolerance assessment and look into how materials actually deflects, and you'll see in the air product, you also saw that with for instance, the shield, it actually deflects and it might shift the results from a tolerance assessment. So that's where it becomes valid when you validate a simulation model, that you can actually use it for decision and not just rely on the tolerances. Well, design for manufacturing, that's where we assess whether it's actually possible to design products at scale within the tolerances and consistently. Because if we cannot do that, all the documentation we produce afterwards cannot be trusted. And then last, design for assembly. We're not just about to produce a functional part or a device. We want to build a device that can be assembled easily and with as few assembly steps as possible, and for the required scale. So just make it clear, it's not about using all these engineering disciplines at once, but where the risk is highest. And also you should consider that a way of structuring your design work between design input and design output, not in a fixed order. And you don't have to bring in have the deepest knowledge within all the aspects. You could bring in knowledge from outside. For instance, when we developed the air project, we engaged with a spring manufacturer quite early to make a alternative spring design and use a tension spring rather than a regular compression spring. That actually is a great benefit during assembly because you avoid tangling. I'll do a quick deep dive into a manufacturing design for manufacturing tool. So this tool is a quite simple tool that we are developing for the next phase of the air projects that will be used to evaluate the maturity of a design before we do a file release. I populated with old parts just to give you an example, but you can see all the parts within the device and the maturity level, whether it's ready to go into file release. So if I take the chassis for example, you can see there's some critical items blocking the release. And it's basically a checklist to see if you're made the right CAD model, have you made a tolerance assessment, or had something elsewhere made a tool design assessment, and also a mole flow analysis. I can, for instance, open a mole report from MGS Roskilde, and this is a mole report from an earlier state where you can see examples like the filling process, but it also revealed that in an early iteration we saw some substantial warpage of the design, and that's an example where if we just expect perfect tolerance but get a part that warps like this, then we cannot trust the analysis. But with a lot of iteration with the mold maker, we brought it down to a minimum, and we didn't see any warps in the prototypes. And so in a case like that, you would call that it could be a critical gate before you can approve the parts for file release, and you'll go through all of the items before you can do a real file release, and prove the individual categories, approve the individual categories, and then release the part. And you can also, when you've done the release and you need to go further to the next iteration, create a new version of the part, and all the documentation that's related to that part is still in the program or in the analysis. So this is a very simple tool, but it can be used like, it's more to mention that sometimes you need a very structured process to mature the design. It's not just about making a mole flow analysis, but you have to go through a checklist. The risk about having a checklist, right, like that, however, is that you can get a nice score, but if there's something that fails, then it can be hidden by a good average.
I was thinking, Martin, when I look at this overview of the parts and the scoring, so I think really high level from a project manager's perspective, it's nice to get that overview of all the parts and the scoring. But from a mechanical point of view, what's kind of like the benefit of the overview that this tool gives you that you might not have normally?
Well, it's a way to get an overview where you need to focus your attention. So in this example, you can see that in most of the cases, they are at 100%. You can also see the parts that have release, parts ready for release, and then the one that's still in review session. So you can easily make a filter to so you can know where you need to put your focus. And it's about like building like a systematically evidence and reducing all the uncertainty related to design for manufacturing to build confidence for the next stage of the device development. Okay, in the next deep dive, I will try to show you what the intention is with this framework to go from design input and all the way to design output. In this deep dive, I'll follow a user need all the way to a design output by using our in-house injection time tool and then a spring design tool. But it's just to give you an example. The principles are the same no matter what kind of device you're working on. So, so the user need I'll use in this case is the user shall be able to deliver a complete dose subcutaneously. And the key driver for that, or one of the key driver, is the injection time. So if the user, if the injection time is too long, the user might lift the device. But if it's on the other hand too short, it might give a poor injection control and discomfort that could also lead to that the user will lift the device. So the injection time is not just a performance driver, it's a key risk driver. But let's go into the injection time. So this is a simplified tool, but where you can adjust some of the key parameters that affect the injection time. So you have parameters that is driven by the drug product, viscosity, drug volume. There's also more advanced parameters, but I'll not go into that. And then the pre-filled syringe, its specification, that the needle diameter, but also the barrel diameter of the pre-filled syringe and the needle length. So to some extent, these parameters are driven by the pharmaceutical company. We can come with recommendation how it should be adjusted to, for instance, an auto-injector like DR. But where we have the possibility to make a change is the spring that we design ourselves. So if we make an example where I adjust the viscosity to 18 centipoise, run a Monte Carlo simulation to see how it affects the distribution of the injection time. And it's a simplified Monte Carlo with only 100 runs to make it faster for this webinar. Now you can see that there will be a small population of all the runs that are outside the target of 2 to 15 seconds. That's been termed as what is needed to avoid the risk I described before. So you can see this as requirement parameters. So if I need to improve that, I would have to lower the spring force, and I'll just lower it to see what happens if I lower it to 13 Newton. And it will compute for a short period. Yeah, now you can see that the population or the simulation that was made is within the requirements that we need. So now we need to develop a spring for that. So this is our spring tools that we use to design extension spring. We are using this trumpet spring in the device. And this standard model that it loads with, we used in our early prototype, indicate that, well, the mean force that we are aiming for is actually too high. So we can manually change the spring to get closer to 13, as it's actually quite close by just reducing the wire diameter, but we can also use profilers to go in a direction where we know it's least prone to tolerance changes of the, in this case, wire diameter or the outer diameter. We also see how the sensitivity of the individual parameters affect the spring performance. But what I'll try to do is actually do a sort of run through different runs to find the most suited spring for the device. What you didn't see in the spring tool is there's also a risk about if the spring force is too high, above 25 Newton, there's a risk of glass breakage. So we also need to solve that. So I start by adjusting the mean force to 13 Newton as we are aiming for, and then I want to make sure that it gets below 25 Newton and see what suggestion it comes up with. So now it brings up 3 candidates. and they are ranked by a tight force window. So it's with the lowest difference between start and end force in the device, the one that is most robust in regards to tolerances. So there's a small difference in the tolerance compared to the other, and then the one with that brings the lowest mass, or the spring with the lowest mass, and that will most likely also be the most suitable if you have a sustainability perspective. But there will be some trade-off of choosing between the three different variants. If you use the low mass, then there will be a higher force deviation compared to the one with the tight force window. But going from, if you're producing millions, then a 3 gram versus 3.5 is worth saving, while the one at 6.6, I would most likely see if we can go for a different option. So I'll select that one, and then you'll get some tolerances out of the analysis that we can use in the spring model. So the end force is 0.9, and the maximum, the mean 1.4. So you can increase some of the you can set some input parameters in the spring model, and actually go to the one. Yeah, it cannot be 100% adjusted according to that. But if I run the Monte Carlo simulation again, I'll see if I actually get it within the limits. And here, you can see you actually get outside of the limits when you select the spring with a higher difference between the start and end force, and maybe also a lower tolerance. So without going through all the iterations, I know that if I select if I had selected the one with a tight force window, I would get closer within reach. But you should also notice that these models, they are very simplified. But it's just to give you an example about how you can go from a user needs, see they are translated into device input requirements in terms of injection time range, and also about maximum force to reduce the risk of glass breakage, and then get to a spring design where you get a list of parameters, including tolerance, that you can go to your spring manufacturer and see if that can produce. So in this case, we're not just designing a spring, we are designing a what you call control response to a specific risk, and build a traceability that supports it. But yeah, that was about showing a path from a design input to a design output, where you also need to make some trade-offs when you do the assessment and look into how sensibility some of the tolerances or parameters that drive the mechanism affect the system. Yeah, and I'll go back to the design for reliability framework again to see if we can sort of close the loop. So will a framework like this answer the opening question about when a device is mature enough to go into clinical trial? I'll say from a mechanical engineering perspective, that's when you can make a traceable argument from a potential failure mode and then show the parameters that controls it, and also the analysis behind. So you would document all the the injection time model, how you get to a spring design, and then in the end you'll get a specification that is derived from your analysis, and that will be the evidence that's to support the decision. So, and you've probably also heard about design for robustness, and now we call it design for reliability. And the reason why is that it's worth remembering or noticing what reliability actually means. It means the probability that something performs its required function without failure under stated condition for a specified period of time. The point about this is it's not about selecting the most robust solution within all of these fields. So for the power spring for an auto injector, if you selected the most robust in regards to tolerances, you would get a heavier spring that have an impact on the sustainability, for instance. And sometimes you also have to make some trade-offs to achieve for instance, better design for assembly. So that's where the design choice came to a tension spring rather than a compression spring, because it makes the assembly of the device much easier. Yeah, and of course, when we get to a spring design or a design of any kind with a specification of parameters, these parameters, they need to be tested or doing a verification test against the original design input. Yeah, and I'll jump to the last slide. So what will the three things to take away from this webinar? I mentioned a couple of times that you should not use all these engineering disciplines at once. That can be quite costly. You should use them where the risk is highest. And then you should focus on make sure that you integrate outside expertise deliberately, so you don't expect that you can come up with the best solution and make the best models on your own. Outside expertise, they can provide you knowledge that you cannot look up just on the internet or doing an AI search. And then the last part, and maybe the most important, is to with this framework is to define a good enough traceable evidence. So it's to show you that you can go from design input, make a assessment with using some of the engineering disciplines, and come up with a specification that can be tested in verification afterwards, and build this traceable evidence. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that you cannot, an assumption before using this framework is that your device is actually mature enough to go to this phase. So you need to make sure that you have the right concept selected, and there should be the right business case in place, and the system architecture should be defined to some extent. So if the concept hasn't been challenged, again, the user needs the technical feasibility and other disciplines within this framework, then no amount of engineering analysis will save it. You can very easily mature a wrong concept very efficiently. So sometimes if something surface during an analysis, maybe it's better to go one step back to the concept phase and solve the problems while it's cheaper. Yeah, that was it from my side. I'm open for questions.
Cool. Thanks, Martin. We already have a few questions in the chat, and the first one is a question about usage of these tools. So it's a question from Paul. Is this manufacturing readiness tool used at MGS to support communication for customer-owned developments?
Well, it's mainly for our internal development that we use a tool like that. And it's actually evolved from a regular Excel-based tool that some of my colleagues made, where we just added some user interface to make it easier to use. And I'm not trying to sell tools, because I think often you need to mature and develop your own tool for your specific needs. But of course, this kind of tools is quite simple and can also be used for customer projects. But they will most likely have to be modified to meet your specific needs. But that's also possible.
I think it kind of depends on where you are in the development process, right? Because I think, to me at least, the injection time model is a really strong tool in early project development, maybe even when you're still developing the drug. So you get that communication between device development for combination products, right, and the drug development, so you can, have that communication back and forth about drug parameters and how that influences injection time or robustness of a device. To me, that's a strong tool in that communication and stakeholder management internally as well. And that is something that I know we are investigating, how we could make that simplified tool something that we can share.
And most likely these tools, they mature during the development phase. So you might start with a simple tools with the basic concepts of what you need. If it's a checklist in Excel, it's okay. But at some point, you need to make sure that someone don't delete a row or a column. And that's where using web-based tools makes it a lot easier, because then it's possible to make logins so you can make sure that when I make a design review, it's only me and not and it will be my name that is on the review name and so on.
The next question, kind of the same, from Peter. The browser-based tool and cockpit you're showing, is that an in-house developed tool? And follow-up question is it a platform that you lease out or only use internally?
I'll say we can easily help people develop this kind of tools. And to be honest, we used Excel tools and then combine it with AI to make a user interface. So we can both assist you make your own kind of tools with that has the sort of the same functionality that suits your need. But we could probably also mature this tool for like the existing tools that we are shown. But my point was early that it's not exactly about the tools itself, but it's more like the process and the process you define within each discipline. So I just used in-house tools as an example about how to structure the process of maturing the processes. And in this case, it was how to release parts for manufacturing.
Yeah, so when we staying on that topic, how early in a product development phase would you begin thinking about, a structured approach like this framework?
Well, when we did the first prototypes of the year, we just follow I showed you brief a mode flow analysis, and itself is quite structured. So we just implemented all the findings part by part, but without having a tool. But that's okay for a concept phase. But when you start maturing the part further on, you really need to make sure that you don't miss something, because maybe not all mode flow analysis or tool analysis have all the identified items you need to go through. So that's why it matures during your process. And we can also, when we find out like what are we missing in a mode flow analysis, then we can also ask for that criteria if needed. So it's a way to strengthen the communication back and forth between the mold maker and the designer.
Cool. Thanks, Martin, and thanks for trying to lift the lid on this design for reliability framework in a really short time. I know it's difficult to deep dive shortly on a quite big framework, and only showing a few the few things that we can. So have a nice afternoon. And
and of course you're also welcome to write to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.